And this three-dimensional model then becomes a way in which we can conceptualize this notion of and come to reconciling the paradox of duality, that, you know, self-other is actually a wholeness. This is very much recognized in Eastern thought in terms of the yin-yang idea. So that's a big picture. Now let's break down the movement itself into the components that the Laban-Bartunieff movement system utilizes. These are what we call the BESS components. So the body, the effort, the space, and shape. Each of those represents one component of movement. And each of those then is explicated and delineated into many, 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 many more parts in this process of differentiation. But very generally, excuse me, body is what we move. Effort is the dynamic qualities of the motion. Space, where we are, where we go, how we get there. And shape is much more about the why, the context, and the relationship aspects of the movement, particularly organizing the body in the space of its environment, the person in the world. So just to give you an example, if I walk into the room, very quickly anyone, even a non-movement analyst, although we actually in fact, all humans are movement analysts, can identify that the person walked into the room. We would not have any big discussion about that idea. But we wouldn't necessarily identify the body in the way that a Laban movement analysis would. They might talk about the fact that the walk was cross-lateral because that is the way humans walk. Or maybe the person, because of some infirmity, was walking more with a body half organization. Or they might see some holding patterns in a part of the body. So all of those things might be aspects of the body. The effort would be the quality. We might describe that we could characterize the walk into the room as being determined, or maybe it was tentative. And in which case what we're doing is we're describing the quality of the mover's action, and that arises from how the mover feels about the world that they are in and what their intention and their goals are in that moment. And so that determines their effort choices and their effort life. And we would be seeing that through the effort factors and effort elements. And I'll talk just a little briefly about that in a moment. The space, now, unless the person walks in backwards or on a strange meandering pathway, we would assume that to go from place one to place two, they would be moving forward in a straight path. So space, again, is present and reveals a lot of information, but much like the walk, in which the person was obviously locomoting forward using their feet for support as they mobilized their weight forward on a pathway, we don't necessarily even have to think about, because it's so much ingrained into how we perceive movement. So the shape, the context, the why, the where, the relationship. What do we notice about that mover as they walk in and take their place? Do they reach out with a limb and spoke toward the door, or toward the podium they're approaching, or toward another to shake the person's hand? Do they have some kind of small fluctuations that are taking place that are a kind of shape flow within the body that we're perceiving? Do they, as they come forward and interact with whatever the environment they're in, do we see them molding and adapting and shaping to it in some way? So what happens here with this simple idea of somebody walking into a room is the LBMS system gives us a way to decipher and parse all the details of that situation in a much more comprehensive and holistic way, because it breaks down all the pieces. So again, it's that part-whole duality. By being able to identify the pieces and name them, we then come into a greater understanding of the whole, of the purpose of that walk into the room, what the person was thinking or feeling, possibly how we feel about them walking into the room. All of those things are now suddenly brought into the possibility of understanding. So now just to talk just briefly about each of these components just a little bit. And again, I want to emphasize that this is a very what we say down and dirty overview. So when you're looking at the body, we can start the body, what is moving, by, again, the part of the whole. Is the entire body moving posturally? Is there a shift of the whole? Or are we seeing subtle things happen in individual parts? And we often see this in gestures, for instance, when someone nods or raises their hand, we see a gestural action identifying a part of them rather than the whole of them moving. Right? So that's one place we can start. We can also start with the notion of the mover's weight, because when you move, you are moving your weight. Weight is what we move. And we identify ourself and experience ourself by the fact that we are three-dimensional beings that have weight. So that is a baseline of body experience, is our weight. And so a primary idea of experience our weight, is it active or is it passive? Have I given my weight into gravity and I'm slumping or resting? Or am I using the opposite of pushing against the earth to resiliently come up and move forward or to some other direction in the space? So how am I using my weight as I shift it and support it? Then there are basic body actions. One of them I spoke about just a moment ago in the example of the person moving into the room. That's a pathway. Other basic body actions include things like jump, change of support, rotate. So there's a list of basic body actions, which are gestalts of primary patterns of movement that we see and identify. And just as in the walk, we know that it's a transporting of the mover through the general space. A jump, we know, lifts them off the earth and allows them to come back down. So you remove your grounding from the earth momentarily to experience skywardness and then come back to earth. And then there's another big aspect of how we organize the body in terms of its patterns. I also reference this in the walk. Cross-lateral is a pattern of organization, but we also have other patterns that we can utilize dependent on our spine, our upper lower, our body half organizations, and these all come from the developmental underpinnings of motor development. And so anyone who has studied motor development knows this idea, or if you've touched into the BMC world, you also know about these ideas of patterns of motor development and how they support the choices in movement that we're making. So that's just a big overview of body. And as I said, body is explicated in many, many more ways. And I didn't even touch upon here the idea of Bartinia fundamentals, which is a further explication of body, identifying the basic six, identifying what are called Bartinia fundamental principles, and body rhythms and connections that relate to this whole notion of mapping the body skeletally. So there's a huge other body of knowledge under body that is the specificity of Bartinia fundamentals. And that is something we go into a lot of depth with in the system. And it's also something that I'll come back to be talking more about when I'm talking about somatics, because much of the way that this work came into acknowledgement of as a somatic system was through Bartiniev's work and her practice. Space, second component I'm going to address, where we go and how we get there. So space is essentially the experience of our inner three-dimensional volume, right? So when we breathe, our whole body expands and condenses. Each cell that we own is constantly in this rhythmic expansion and condensing rhythm. So it starts from our inner experience, our body container experience of a growing, shrinking, expanding, condensing idea. And then it further is explicated out into our reach space. It's sometimes referred to our bubble of space, the personal space. You'll see that in nonverbal communication literature. And it's what Laban called our kinesphere, our reach space, when we extend our body's limbs or extend our body out into space. And it is the space that we can access with our body without locomoting through the space. So this notion that space exists on a continuum from inner to kinesphere to general space out into the world beyond what we can see or experience, out into the cosmos. And then there's the metaphoric cyberspace that we now are so familiar with as well. So the routes that we take from here to there is reflected in our pathways within our kinesphere. Central, peripheral, transverse, and the spatial phrasing all become really very clearly explicated in Laban's study of space harmony. He really goes into depth and detail about how the mover utilizes this personal kinespheric bubble and utilizes this for accomplishing goals, for interacting with one another, for inhabiting the world, for taking a stand in the world. And space is a lovely place to explore. Space also is one of the ways in which this system is differentiated from other somatic practices, that the explication of space is much more refined in this system than it is in many other practices due to Laban's space harmony work. So here's a little picture from the China program, and here you can see that these students are exploring their kinespheric space, and they're reaching out generally to far reach, and you can identify that some are reaching side and up, some are reaching back and down, some are reaching across themselves, some are opening their bodies. So you can just notice that idea that exploring and becoming more specific about the space is one of the ways in which the system is applied, and one of the ways that we bring people into awareness of themselves and the world around them. Effort. The third of the best components I'm going to address briefly. Effort describes the dynamics of the mover's energy, revealing their motivation, their intentions, their preferential patterns. So sometimes it's habitual patterns and not so much their intent in the moment. So it's a combination of both something that's habitual to them as well as something that is going on in the moment that they are responding to. Effort patterns then reveal personal, cultural, as well as what is universal. So effort is one of these aspects of the study of movement that allows us really to explore the continuum from our personal experience to what it is that universally makes us all human and what we all share. And that's another value in this system that we really go into a lot of depth about in terms of our understanding of ourself, leading to a greater possibility of understanding other and working and connecting with other. Effort is composed of four factors, and each of these four factors has an indulging element and a condensing element. So I'm not going to go into a lot of depth and detail here, but this is just to show a little bit more of the explication. So the four factors are flow, weight, space, and time. Flow deals with the progression and control idea of our movement. This is the one where I often give the example of an elderly grandparent going down a steep hill with a young grandchild. Well, the elderly grandparent who is afraid of falling really tries to control their progression because they're afraid of falling. The child, however, who is not afraid of falling and perhaps doesn't even think about the possibility of falling, runs freely down the hill, giving into that pull of gravity and going with the flow. So you can see this notion of holding on or letting go in flow, the flow factor. Weight has to do with this notion of our intention and how we assert ourselves. And it's related to our use of force, touch, pressure. So this has to do with how we make an impact in the world. So you can think about gently stroking someone's cheek to, get a little piece of dirt off it or to wipe away a tear. Or you can think about what happens if you, slap someone across the face, that there's a lot of force and pressure involved in that. And so how our attention to our quality of our touch and our force and how we make an impact in the world is about how we use and apply our weight to the world and have an impact in the world. Because you certainly are making an impact on someone if you are responding by delicately touching their face and stroking it, just as much as you're making an impact on a person if you slap them. So both are types of impact that we have, but one is a delicate touch and one is forceful assertion. Space, not space that I was